Joel and Ellie's journey through post-apocalyptic America became the swan song of a generation nearly 7 years ago. Now, Naughty Dog is positioned for a repeat with The Last of Us Part 2. But this time, the focus is on Ellie and her quest for revenge. I've spent the last few days digging through every article, interview, and gameplay trailer to bring you 101 things you need to know about The Last of Us Part 2. Heads up, there was a substantial leak of story spoilers for this game, stuff I will not be covering in this video. I'm only sharing publicly shared information. Do not read the comment section if you want to avoid spoilers. Before we hop into the story, The Last of Us Part 2 is a narrative-driven action-adventure game developed by Naughty Dog. The game is exclusive to PlayStation 4 and launches June 19th, less than 2 weeks away from the time of recording. The story picks up 5 years after the events of The Last of Us. Ellie is 19 now and living in a settlement in Jackson, Wyoming. Naughty Dog describes Jackson as a safe, secure place in a really messed up world. Ellie has a real community now, people who love and care for her and are willing to sacrifice for her. Joel is settled down too. He's now a part of this town. Ellie and the town of Jackson are shaken by a violent event. People have wronged her, and both Ellie and the player will want retribution for what's been done. This journey leads us to Seattle, where we're thrust into a conflict between warring factions, stuck in the middle while looking for a very specific group of people that wronged us. There's going to be lots of twists and turns, but this is the general concept for the story. Ellie develops a relationship with her best friend, Dina. Early on, they leave Jackson to clear out the infected near the settlement. Things go wrong, and something horrible happens to Dina. Presumably, she's killed. And this is what fuels Ellie's thirst for revenge. The official story trailer suggests we'll have some scenes at the very beginning of the game to bridge the gap between parts 1 and 2. We see new footage of a younger Ellie along with a dialogue from Joel explaining what happened at the end of the original game. Also, we have this scene of Joel riding with Tommy. Not sure if this is a cutscene or a playable section. On the themes for part 2, Naughty Dog was hoping to create a story that comments on the cycle of violence, how certain acts can beget other acts, and the true consequences of one's actions. We're told that there are no perceived good guys or bad guys, very similar to the end of The Last of Us Part 1. Some people see Joel as evil for making his decision, while others do not. They're trying to hit that same note with Part 2. Creative director Neil Druckmann explained further, if the first game's theme was about the love between Joel and Ellie, Part 2 is the opposite. It's about hate. It's about themes of violence and how far you would go to exact revenge. It's about the pursuit of justice, the positives and negatives associated with that, and the messy gray area that we often find ourselves stuck in. Naughty Dog was well aware of the fear of messing up what made the original game special, and their test was to make a story that can stand on its own and carry its own weight, but it also has to be additive because it's a sequel. Part 2 is meant to complement and respect the original game, and if we happen to have played the first one, it has a greater narrative meaning when both are taken together. Naughty Dog recognizes that The Last of Us at its heart is about Joel and Ellie, and they care to honor them specifically. They explored what are the honest next steps that these characters would take. They expand on the relationship between Ellie and Joel, but also focus on the development of Ellie's interpersonal relationships as a 19-year-old. While the focus is on Joel and Ellie, this is also an ensemble piece like Part 1. We're going to go somewhere else and see new characters that are central to the game's themes. And this is still a genre story about infection, but the core of it is still about these really intimate relationships. Apparently, we can expect this story to be more divisive than the first game because it asks players to interpret the material and asks philosophical questions. Naughty Dog made something they really believe in, and they had to lean into the fear of upsetting certain people, even to the point where they've said that there will be fans of the first game who do not like Part 2. While we've been focusing about the dark themes of revenge and and violence, we have been assured that there will be light moments as well. And we see many of them in the gameplay footage so far, particularly with Ellie and Dina. Naughty Dog recognizes that, similar to the first game, they need to bring a little bit of levity in there too. Composer Gustavo Santaolalla has returned to compose the music for Part 2. And if you're a fan of the first game, you're probably a fan of his music because it was such a core part of that experience. And I've tried to splice some of his pieces in here in the background, but most of it is from the original game, but it's still his music. Let's jump into returning characters, starting with Ashley Johnson, returning to reprise her role as Ellie. Part 2 is from the perspective of Ellie this time around, so we'll get to experience her journey for revenge firsthand. And not only will that change our perspective from the narrative side of things, but also from gameplay, which we'll talk about a bit later. Joel returns as well, played by Troy Baker. He's no longer a smuggler because the town of Jackson relies on him as a capable killer. That's something that this town really needs. He's still fiercely protective of Ellie. We hear Jesse mention how Joel lectures him before Ellie's patrols. In the footage released so far, we see him in Jackson and when he joins Ellie later on in her journey. Joel's brother Tommy returns, reprised by actor Jeffrey Pierce. He has a complicated history with his brother and he helped establish the settlement in Jackson. Of course, we saw him in the first game. So far, we've seen him comforting Ellie after the event with Dina and warning her about her quest for revenge. That's all the information we have about returning characters. One that I think we'll definitely see is Tommy's wife Maria, unless something happened to her. As far as new characters, the biggest one is Dina. This is Ellie's best friend for several years. We see them go out on an expedition together, and there's been an underlying romance for a while now, and we see these characters kiss for the first time and then reveal their feelings for each other. Dina's played by Shannon Woodward, who you might recognize from HBO's Westworld. I did want to note that Ellie is wearing a mask with Dina in certain scenes, so this leads me to believe, and this is original game spoilers by the way, you probably should be watching this anyway if you haven't played the first game, but maybe Dina doesn't know that Ellie's immune. In the first game, we know that Joel made it very clear that she should not share that information with anyone. In a TV commercial for the game, we see Ellie wearing Dina's bracelet, and this is something we've seen before, but we weren't quite sure where the bracelet was from. Clearly, Dina is very near and dear to her. Next is Jesse, who we learn is a former love interest of Dina, and he seems to be in charge of the patrols outside of Jackson. He accompanies Ellie at some point in her journey, but ultimately decides to abandon her. Jesse's played by Stephen Chang, who played a character in Captain Marvel. In the teaser trailer, we were introduced to 16-year-old Yara and 13-year-old Lev, played by Victoria Grace and Ian Alexander. These two are siblings and former members of one of the factions in the game, the Seraphites. And in the same scene, they end up saving a mystery woman played by Laura Bailey, who has played so many characters in video games, but in terms of Naughty Dog, she played Nadine Ross in the Uncharted games. Now, I'm not sure if this is 100% confirmed, but I believe Mystery Woman's name is Abby, and Abby is mentioned in the demo portion of the game that's been revealed and also in previews. She's associated with the other faction in the game, the WLF. According to co-writer Hallie Gross, every single character is empowered and equal because this world requires capability. Ellie isn't going to be alone always in her journey. She'll have allies helping her along the way. These allies know how to use a gun. They know how to stealth, how to kill a clicker. They'll help navigate, stop enemies, and help in combat. There are other characters mentioned and some even teased in the gameplay and trailers. Particularly, Ellie is hunting someone named Nora, who is involved with the WLF, and this guy, we only see him once, but he definitely looks like a character. Naughty Dog typically focuses on a limited cast, so I don't think we're gonna see too many more characters. Let's get to the setting. The game takes place 25 years after the outbreak of a pandemic, a parasitic fungal infection that has devastated mankind. While the first game focused in the Northeast and parts of the Midwest, Part 2 will take us to new areas of the country that haven't been explored in in The Last of Us. Similar to the first game, Part 2 takes place over multiple seasons and climates, from snow-capped mountains to the Pacific Northwest. The goal was to make environments beautiful, grounded, and authentic of the places they're based on, rendered in meticulous detail and tremendous scale. The two confirmed locations we've seen so far are Jackson, Wyoming, and Seattle, Washington. Jackson, Wyoming is where the original game ended and where Part 2 begins. Since they've been here for 4 to 5 years, Ellie and Joel have built up relationships with these characters that we haven't seen until the game's events start. Ellie herself has done a lot of growing. 14 to 19 is a big transition, so we're going to see a lot of what she's learned in the meantime. The events of the game come in on regular everyday life. Ellie and Dina are patrolling outside the settlement to clear infected and keep the people safe. This is where we see the winter season, but there's also been glimpses of a fall season in Jackson too. The event with Dina shakes Ellie and the town of Jackson, so Ellie decides to leave on a revenge quest, which leads her to Seattle. This is where a large part of the game and the story will unfold. It's a massive former quarantine zone. The locales of Seattle are diverse, from dense city centers to suburbs to stormy waterfronts. There will be drastic shifts in architecture, elevation, and weather depending where we are. Seattle is also a war zone between two factions fighting over territory and resources. These are the only two locations we know about, which is a bit strange if you played the original game, because there were sections in Austin, Boston, Pittsburgh, Colorado, Salt Lake City, and Jackson, Wyoming. If Ellie takes a direct route, she has to pass through Idaho and Oregon, and maybe she could go through Montana. We really don't know. I don't think these are the only two places we'll visit. Let's talk about the two main factions of the game, starting with the WLF, or the Washington Liberation Front. This is a militia that began as a resistance to the military occupation of Seattle. They eventually fought back the military and wrestled control of the city. They're described as highly trained, organized, and equipped with weapons that they stole from the army. They control much of the city, and they imprison or kill trespassers on sight. They refer to themselves as wolves, and other factions like the Scars will call them that. Of the characters we've seen so far, we know that Nora is part of the WLF, and possibly that Abby mystery woman character. They also use attack dogs to patrol the streets, which has a core gameplay mechanic we'll talk about in a bit. The other faction is the Seraphites, or the Scars. They're defined by their deep, self-inflicted wounds cut across their faces. They're very cultish, deeply tribalistic, and a territorial group. There's a real emphasis on rituals. They hunt down apostates and, quote, clip their wings, which is essentially just breaking their arms with hammers. They hang people in trees and on posts and recite the phrase, "They are nested with sin, free them, that they may now know love," before disemboweling their victims. We also know that they refer to the infected as demons, so if it wasn't clear, this is a deeply religious group. We get more insights on the Seraphites from that scene where Yara and Lev save the mystery woman, who we think is Abby. Naughty Dog tells us that the Scars would normally hate someone like Abby. They see them as less than human. That's why they string them up and kill them, which is why we believe that Abby is probably WLF. Before we move on, I just wanted to note that we've seen no mention of the Fireflies outside of the events of the first game. We do see some Firefly symbols in trailers and concept art, but it's very possible that that was just placeholder stuff. We don't really know if they have a core role in the narrative of Part 2. On to gameplay. The Last of Us Part 2 evolves in many areas in terms of gameplay mechanics, but the general idea is the same. We'll explore a series of relatively open levels with small linear sections which serve to push the narrative forward. The gameplay loop involves combat, looting, and exploration. While this isn't an open world game, Naughty Dog wanted the levels to be wider, more detailed, and more realistic rather than a series of combat and exploration spaces strung together. They wanted something that feels legitimate. However, the world is open enough that there are entire story moments and combat encounters that you can completely miss if you don't find them. And even though some may miss these, if we find it, it lends to the charm and magic and player agency. They want us to feel like, wow, we stumbled upon and found this. No one really told us to go here. We found it. In terms of environmental design, this is Naughty Dog's most ambitious game in scope. and it includes all things you would expect from realistic environments. For example, in the winter sections in Jackson, they have snow deformation, ice breaking, snow falling off trees if you brush beside them on your horse. They have a winter storm rolling in and picking up over time. It's realistic, but it's also there to build the tension with the narrative. Part 2 runs on the next evolution of the Naughty Dog engine, which includes improved lighting, a character pipeline, muscle deformation, rain effects, facial performances, and a whole new animation rig. In terms of an overarching design goal for gameplay, Naughty Dog was inspired by sequels that take risks. They wanted to take a hard look at every single subsystem and ask how to progress it to the next level, from stealth to melee, to crafting, to traversal, while always focusing on player choice and the fidelity or quality of the experience. According to Neil Druckmann, everything in the gameplay of Part 2 comes out of the story. It's through the systems, and players have to feel the pressure of survival and how to manage their scarce resources. Part 2's gameplay needs to immerse us in the world. It needs to give us interesting actions to survive and overcome obstacles. But above all, it needs to put us in Ellie's shoes. It needs to make us feel what she feels, and they want the weight of our decisions for our characters to be felt. Let's talk about exploration and crafting. For traversing the world, we have horseback riding, which is used to quickly cover large areas. While Ellie can swim, portions of Seattle will be flooded, so we'll also need to use a boat in order to progress those areas. Most of the time, we'll be on foot. Since Ellie is more agile and athletic than Joel, that opened interesting new avenues for traversal. For example, Naughty Dog added a dedicated jump button with an arc. This adds a platforming mechanic that can be used in and out of combat. This lent to designing more interesting puzzles and vertical environments for us to explore. Ellie now has the ability to prone, which allows her to crawl under things and squeeze through tight spaces. We also have a rope that we can use to swing across gaps and scale objects. Other details, we can break windows, which allows us to solve puzzles and get behind doors, and also red generators are back. If you remember the original game, that was a key part of puzzling. While exploring the world, we'll come across notes, just like we did in The Last of Us. For example, in one of the demos, people found a love letter written by someone who died right when the outbreak began 25 years ago. The ability to scavenge for materials and craft will return too, so we'll scan the environments searching for materials used for crafting recipes. Ellie can pull out her backpack at any time and craft anything she needs on the go if she has the required materials. Neil Druckmann explained that crafting is a payoff for exploration. It makes us want to explore and open things and find materials in order to craft items. They expanded the recipe system in order to force interesting decisions on what to make. We're going to have to be creative with our items. Similar to The Last of Us, we're going to have to make trade-offs between using resources to make, for example, a Molotov or a health kit. This idea has expanded further in Part 2. They've added new elements for a broader range of options and overlapping recipes. Some of the new crafted items we've seen are trap mines, stun bombs, the ability to craft ammo, and suppressors. Stun bombs, you guessed it, temporarily stun enemies in a small area on impact. Trap mines deploy in place and detonate on proximity. According to a preview, trap mines are useful for luring attack dogs who are tracking Ellie's scent. Ellie can craft arrows now, and she can even craft explosive arrows, which detonate on impact, dealing massive damage in a large radius. If you manage to hit one, enemies will literally explode to bits. She can also retrieve regular arrows, but in one preview for The Last of Us Part 2, they confirmed that these arrows break 70 to 80% of the time on Survivor difficulty. So that's something to keep in mind if you play on harder modes. Ellie can also craft suppressors for her weapons. We've only seen it on the pistol so far, but it breaks in 3 shots unless upgraded, and she can take it on or off depending on the situation. On the list of returning craftable items, we have the health kit used to recover HP, Molotovs to burn our enemies, smoke bombs used to distract or create an escape, and melee weapon upgrades, which enhance the melee damage of whichever melee weapon we have. Ellie has a variety of options for tackling her enemies, so let's start with ranged weapons. So far, we've seen a bolt-action hunting rifle, shotgun, 9mm pistol, revolver, and a bow and arrow. Of course, there's bound to be more options in the full game. Shooting is fairly straightforward with an emphasis on realism. Headshots are fatal, and most humans die within a few shots unless they are armored. However, bullets can dismember in this game, so we can expect that with weapons like the shotgun. Weapon sway is substantial by default, and ammunition is scarce. We'll have to carefully pick our shots and make sure we're on target. Like the original game, when we're being fired upon, Ellie can use weakened enemies as human shields to protect herself and give you a little bit of time to figure out your next move. According to a preview by Grizz Gaming, every 3 seconds, Ellie has an animation where she pulls back the hammer on her pistol and her aim pushes upward for a slight millisecond. He says we'll have to time our shots around this little animation, which seems odd. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be an idle thing that doesn't affect gameplay, just something that looks cool, or it's actually something we have to consider. In addition to weapon suppressors, the bow and arrow is a silent option that maintains stealth. It has a much improved UI in part 2, and we have to worry about arrows dropping like in real life. It's important to note that draw speed is very slow by default, but it can be upgraded. So in the gameplay where we see Ellie using it in combat, that is like a very upgraded bow. Whenever Ellie gets hit by an enemy bow and arrow, she'll be impaled, which causes damage over time. Eventually, we're gonna have to remove that arrow by pressing R1 to stop the bleeding. It's a really brutal animation and effect. We're able to craft throwable items and toss other objects found in the world. For example, we can use bricks and bottles to distract enemies in stealth or to smash their faces open and follow it up with a brutal melee takedown. At the same time, we can toss bombs and other objects we've mentioned before in order to create an escape or blow enemies to bits. On to melee combat, which was completely redone for part 2. Naughty Dog wanted to make you feel like you're not the strongest person, but you're small and nimble. You can still rise to the challenge to defeat people who are bigger than you. A lot of the game's systems and mechanics were designed with this in mind. Ellie picked up a lot of lessons from Joel on how to survive, but she learned many of them on her own. She learned to use her agility and her size to her advantage. Part 2's melee system is described as kinetic and a lot more dynamic than The Last of Us. For example, Ellie can handle multiple enemies at once and can dodge attacks using the L1 button, which adds a new dimension. There's an intricate system which examines the direction of incoming strikes, and it always does something contextual that honors where the move is coming from. Depending on the type of enemy attacking and the weapon that they're using, Ellie will respond dynamically. For example, in close quarters combat, it will incorporate the environment, so we see Ellie getting slammed into cars or thrown over counters and damaged. With the right timing, we see that Ellie can disarm enemy weapons to use against them. Dodging also gives Ellie a chance to disengage from the fight and escape, because sometimes the threat is so overpowering that we just have to get away or we'll die. We're forced to fight actively, and escape is a critical part of the core combat loop. It's also another reason that they added the jump button, because we can use it to escape or reposition for an attack. Either way, it adds verticality to combat scenarios. We can always flee to find stealth and regain that advantage, because once again, we're more agile than most enemies. We're also going to have to learn how opponents attack, and mastering dodge timing will create openings to get an advantage on our opponents. As far as melee weapons, we've seen hammers, hatchets, machetes, pipes, and a pickaxe in addition to Ellie's switchblade from the first game. However, there are no more craftable shivs like Joel had. We can upgrade certain melee weapons using the crafting system to give a temporary damage boost, and we'll cover crafting later in the video. Naughty Dog describes stealth in part 2 as more balanced, with lots of tools to escape and evade. They really aimed for more nuanced and deeper systems. In the original, stealth was binary. It was just whether an enemy can see or hear you or not, but now it's analog. dialogue. It's a combo of the foliage that you're using to hide in and Ellie's stance, which is either standing, crouched, or prone. A combination of those factors will determine whether enemies can see you or not. For Naughty Dog, prone is a huge addition to stealth gameplay because we use it to hide in shorter grass and to traverse through tight spaces. For example, we can crawl underneath cars in order to stealth. That wasn't a scripted sequence, that's actually something we can do at any time. However, enemies do look under things and will yank us out and try to kill us if they find us. If we are discovered, we can lose enemies by breaking line of sight and by using environmental elements like tall grass. Tall grass provides what Naughty Dog calls partial protection because we're not completely hidden. People far away can't really see us, but if they walk up to Ellie in tall grass, they can spot us. This makes us more aware of our surroundings. According to previews, if we're in the right position, we'll press triangle and then square to execute a stealth takedown on an unknowing enemy. If we mess up, the target can turn around, scream, and alert everyone in the surrounding area, so we have to be careful. Ellie will give us a little voice line to confirm when we've gotten a clean stealth kill and lets us know that we're in the clear for now and that enemy didn't alert anyone else. Listen mode is back from the original game, which allows us to sense the direction of enemies through walls. However, there's a new mechanic. Now we have to worry about scent because of attack dogs. Everywhere we move will leave a trail behind us, and attack dogs will track us down following that scent. The first game didn't allow us to use listen mode on harder difficulties, but according to a preview, we do have listen mode on Survivor, and that's presumably because of these attack dogs. According to Grizz Gaming, Ellie can dive underwater for about 16 seconds at a time. However, this shouldn't be used as a stealth mechanic because enemies can see you underwater and you're very vulnerable to enemy gunfire. For people that are wondering if we can stealth past everyone and not kill a single person, Naughty Dog wanted to allow players to choose how they want to approach combat, which means they can stealth by if the narrative and situation allows for it. However, not all combat can be bypassed, but the majority can. A lot of the time, we can escape levels without enemies ever knowing we were there. Let's talk more about enemies and AI. Human enemies are described as a lot more threatening and more sophisticated. They communicate between each other. Enemies also have contextual conversations. They'll comment on events that you've been involved in or things that will happen soon. They'll also realize when one of their group is missing if you happen to take them out one by one. Ellie is a very skilled killer, and when balancing her feeling empowered but also making the world feel dangerous, Naughty Dog decided to escalate both of those factors. The AI is much smarter, it's coordinating, and it's relaying information. They refer to each other by name. But at the same time, Ellie has become much more capable, and increasing both increases the tension. It forces players to be creative and use every resource available. In part 2, we'll see different enemy archetypes for the first time. It seems that there's bigger, bulkier guys that are able to carry large weapons in addition to the regular-sized human enemies. In terms of gameplay, the WLF is definitely gun heavy. They should remind us of the Fireflies from the first game, more militaristic, but they'll always be shooting at us. The attack dogs, however, add an extra layer. They will track Ellie's scent and we'll have to navigate those patrols. According to previews, these dogs are very deadly and will rip our throats out if we let them. We're able to throw bottles in order to get the dogs off our scent or plant trap mines in order to kill them. On the other hand, the Scars are the opposite. They are stealthy. They'll use overgrowth for cover and sort of spring and surprise us. They'll stick to silent weapons like bows and arrows and melee. There's been no mention from Naughty Dog about hunters so far. These are hostile survivors that hunt down others and kill indiscriminately for supplies. It's a group we ran into a lot in the first game, and it seems like Ellie encounters a group of scavengers in part 2 gameplay, so not 100% sure. While I've somehow managed to not even mention the infected up to this point, they are still a big threat. Even the lowest class of infected is more dangerous. That's the runners. They're more numerous and more aggressive than the first game. The iconic clickers are back. They are blind enemy types and very deadly. They use echolocation to see in certain directions temporarily. However, in this game, they'll do it more frequently and they are more perceptive than before. Stalkers return. They have a bigger role this time around. They sneak and hide before springing on Ellie and attacking. They surprise their victims with agility and extreme violence. In a face-off with a stalker, Ellie can actually evade it just like it can evade us. According to some previews, they hunch over on all fours and they can't be seen in listen mode, so that'll add another challenging element. Of course, there will be new stages of infected introduced. The one we've seen so far is the Shambler, which is a lumbering, heavily armored enemy covered in pustules. These guys will expel a corrosive cloud when close in order to burn their victims. Naughty Dog has also teased other stages of infected as a surprise for release, and they sound like this. The combination of improved AI and Ellie's mechanics enhances boss fights. So we'll see stalkers, for example, slamming us into objects, and they want us to feel like we're barely surviving these encounters. Sometimes we'll run into multiple threats. There will be two factions together, or maybe humans and infected mixed, so we can attack them separately or find ways in order to pit them against each other. The final section of this video is dedicated to the Workbench and Upgrades systems. The Workbench returns from The Last of Us, which allows us to inspect our weaponry and apply upgrades. Over the course of the game, we'll come across scrap, which we can pick up and use to upgrade our weapon parts and attributes, which are always visualized. From what we've seen, the pistol can have upgraded rate of fire, recoil capacity, and stability. The shotgun can have upgraded rate of fire, stability, and capacity. The rifle can have upgraded stability, capacity, scope, and damage. And the bow has draw speed, stability, and rangefinder upgrades. Naughty Dog chose to completely overhaul the player upgrade system and divide it into separate upgrade branches. The ones we see are precision, survival, crafting, stealth, and the last one is locked. These offer skills that are specific to their branch. In order to unlock specific skills, we need to use pills that we found out in the world. And in order to unlock new branches, we have to find these training manuals. We have bits and pieces of these upgrade branches with some of the skills known and unknown, so I'm going to show you what we know so far. In the survival upgrade branch, we have skills that increase your total health, something that involves health kits, and something that involves your listening mode. In the crafting tree, we have something involving upgrading melee weapons. We have a scrap skill, the ability to make smoke bombs, improved health kits, and then something involving multiple smoke bombs. Under stealth, we see the ability to craft silencers, enemies in listen mode showing up more clearly, a faster prone movement speed, and improving silencer durability from 3 shots to 5. Under precision, we see improved aiming stability and accuracy while moving, move faster while aiming, increased listen mode range, and the ability to hold your breath for lining up shots. We also have a 5th upgrade branch, but it is locked until we unlock a certain weapon. With the upgrade system, Naughty Dog wanted a stronger emphasis on choices made for the long term through weapon upgrades and player upgrade systems. We also know that there aren't enough resources in a single playthrough in order to fully upgrade and grab all of these skills. They want us to have to live with those choices, and all of them have noticeable, tangible effects on the way that we play for a greater connection between our skills and our gameplay with Ellie. And last but not least, there is a moment from the demo that previewers have mentioned where we can be attacked while we're at a workbench, like upgrading our weapons, which sounds crazy. However, we have confirmed that this is a scripted event and not all benches work like that. Not all of them are unsafe. That was 101 things you need to know about The Last of Us Part 2. I hope you're ready to hit the ground running once the game releases on June 19th. If you found this video useful and want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on social media, links are in the description below, as well as on Discord to discuss games that are coming out, including The Last of Us Part 2. Big thanks to my patrons Bill, Grass, Taste the Wine, Jackie, Spyro, and Kamal. If you didn't know, I launched a Patreon a while ago that offers exclusive content for people that want to support me further, like updates on new videos and behind the scenes content. If you're interested in supporting me further as a creator, check it out in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.